space fans, and welcome to Space Chat, the show where every week I take a deeper look at Earth, the universe, and beyond. This week I'll be talking all about women in space, as March 8th marked International Women's Day, and March is Women's History Month. So I'm going to dive into this topic and then answer some of your questions. So stay tuned to see if I answer yours. So let's talk women in space. Women have been working to understand the cosmos since the earliest recorded history. For example, Hypatia, an astronomer, mathematician, and philosopher from the Eastern Roman Empire, taught astronomy in Alexandria. And Hypatia was born in 360 AD. So women have really been taking strides in astronomy for quite some time. Now, while not always allowed the same educational opportunities and societal support, women have persisted in astronomy and astrophysics and other space sciences throughout the centuries. Even today, despite persisting inequalities put on women, and even more so women of color in space science fields, women have made critical contributions to astronomy and other sciences. From Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who discovered pulsars, to Vera Rubin, who discovered the science behind stars and confirmed the existence of dark matter, women have been a critical part of how we understand the universe around us. Now, when it comes to spaceflight, women have been working and pushing to fly to space since spaceflight became a technological possibility, and even before that. But it wasn't until 1978 that the first women were allowed to apply to be astronauts at NASA, years after the Apollo program closed, and a full 20 years since the agency was formed. Now, NASA's first female astronaut to fly to space was Sally Ride, who made her first flight in 1983. This was about 2 decades after, in 1963, Valentina Tereshkova, a Soviet cosmonaut, became the first woman ever to travel to space. Now, while women at NASA weren't able to become astronauts until 1978 and didn't fly until the 80s, many still know the story of the Mercury 13. The Mercury 13 were a group of 13 women who were all pilots, who, if they had been men, would not have only been qualified to be astronauts as part of NASA's Mercury program, but who were outperforming some of their male counterparts. So how it went was aerospace physician Randy Lovelace was in charge of developing and handling the physical, mental tests for all of the Mercury astronauts. So this was everything from EKG exams, really intense isolation, sensory deprivation tests, neurological exams, psychological and personality exams, everything, right? And so in secret, he got this group of 13 women test pilots together to basically have them go through the same exact testing as the Mercury 7 men were going through to see how they would fare. And they did really well. In fact, Jerry Cobb, one of the Mercury 13, not only finished all phases of testing, but she significantly outperformed many of the Mercury 7 male astronauts. However, the program was canceled before any of the women had the opportunity to fly to space. And this wasn't because it lost funding or anything like that. It was simply that Lovelace needed the military equipment to continue testing, and since NASA had no intention of sending the women to space, they wouldn't allow him to use that equipment. Now, while women were not allowed to become astronauts, they were still really vital to these early crewed missions. For example, hidden figures like Katherine Johnson, who calculated orbital mechanics, were extremely critical to the success of these missions. Other such women include Dorothy Vaughan and Mary W. Jackson, who NASA just named their headquarters after, which is really, really exciting. Poppy Northcutt also made history as the first woman engineer to work in NASA's mission control. And these are just a few names. There were so many women whose names are less popularized, but who were extremely important to these missions. Now, fast forward through Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, to when women are finally allowed to start applying to be astronauts. In 1987, almost a decade after NASA started allowing women to apply, they accepted Mae Jemison into the astronaut corps, the first African-American female astronaut. She made her historic but only flight in 1992 as the first Black woman in space. And on this flight, she conducted a whopping 44 science experiments. Stephanie Wilson, Joan Higginbotham, those are the only other Black women astronauts who have traveled to space, still to this day. Yvonne Hagel, Jeanette Epps, and Jessica Watkins were also accepted into the astronaut corps, all as Black women, but they have never flown. Now, in 1994, Kalpana Challa was chosen as the first NASA astronaut of Indian descent. However, unfortunately, during her second flight on Columbia, the shuttle exploded upon re-entry and she was killed. However, women have continued to push the boundaries of human spaceflight, despite any and all obstacles that have been presented to them, with NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson holding the record still for the most time spent in space of all American astronauts. NASA astronauts Christina Cook and Jessica Meir completed the first all-women spacewalk in 2019, and Cook actually went on to beat a different record of Peggy Whitson's, which is the longest single spaceflight made by a woman, spending a whopping 328 consecutive days in space. Now, with the Artemis program, which some of you may have heard of, NASA is looking to land the first woman on the moon in a lunar landing that they plan for sometime in the 2020s. So while this progress might seem slow, it does seem that the agency is working to actively make room for women in these spaces. So that's really just a basic overview of women in space. There's obviously much more to the history and reasons for all of the things that have gone on that I've mentioned that I haven't mentioned. But for now, let's dive into some questions. Quick some water. All right, someone asks, can you talk about Mercury 13 a bit? I feel like they're forgotten. If you missed me talking about it just a minute or so ago, the Mercury 13 were a group of women pilots who were tested alongside, but in secret, alongside the Mercury 7 astronauts at the start of human spaceflight. And it was really incredible because of how well they did in these tests, many times better than their male counterparts, while still being excluded from human spaceflight. So that's just a little synopsis if you missed my more in-depth description a couple minutes ago. Ooh, how accurate is the movie Hidden Figures? So for those of you that have not seen the film Hidden Figures, it's really, it's a great watch. And it's about some of these hidden figures which I mentioned before, like Katherine Johnson, like Dorothy Vaughan, like Mary Jackson, the women, and specifically the women of color, who were critical to NASA's human spaceflight program, but whose names were not popularized at the time, who no one knew existed, and whose work was often, they weren't seen as having done that work, despite their work being really integral to these missions in a very significant way. So how accurate is the movie? I think it's fairly accurate. Even Katherine Johnson, who was asked about it, she has said she thinks it's fairly accurate. There are a few points that aren't perfect in the film. Of course, it's a movie. For example, Kevin Costner's character, he crowbars the exclusionary bathroom sign. There's a few other dramatic, helpful moments. He's actually loosely based on a real man named Bob Gilruth, and Bob did not do that. This was a fictionalized scene in him helping these women. So there are a few fictionalized moments in the film, but overall, it's fairly accurate. Alright, who was the first woman to work for NASA? So, I have kind of an interesting answer to this because it wasn't technically NASA yet, but Pearl Young. In 1922, Pearl Young became the first woman technical employee. She was a physicist, and it was at the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which later became NASA. So, she kind of was the first woman employee at NASA. It's tough to exactly say. Alright, many of the early women to work for NASA were computers. What exactly did that entail? Yes. So many of you may have heard the term human computer, right? Especially if you've seen the film Hidden Figures. The human computers are these women who were doing, many times by hand, these calculations for these NASA missions. And there were many of these human computers. And so what they did was they did things like plan What they did was they did things like plan trajectories and calculate orbital dynamics of planets. Their math is what helped the other teams at NASA know where to send the spacecraft. How are the planets, what are the dynamics of the planets? How are they orbiting? Where is everything? Where should the spacecraft go? These calculations were extremely important to get the spacecraft to where they wanted it to go and home safely. So pretty important if you ask me. All right, why was Valentina Tereshkova chosen by Russia to go to space? What branch of science was she in? Why did she go? So as I mentioned before, Valentina was the first woman in history to go to space when in 1963 she flew around the Earth, I think about 48 times over the course of 3 days. And she was only 26 at the time. Now, she wasn't a scientist. In the early days of spaceflight, most of the people who flew were rather test pilots, people who were more involved in the flight aspect rather than the science aspect. And so while she actually wasn't a test pilot, she was an extremely accomplished parachute jumper. She was with an air sports club over there, and she jumped about 126 times in parachute jumping. And so this pretty extreme experience is what kind of made her stand out and be chosen after she volunteered for the Soviet space program. So kind of a strange, kind of an odd story behind that one. This is a great question. Okay, what STEM programs are out there to involve my 8-year-old daughter? This is a great question because today there are so many. Obviously, the challenges for women in space and science and in general are not done. We're not done, it's not over, but today there are so many more opportunities for young girls who are interested in STEM to engage with them and get them excited and to support them in their interest in science, engineering, math, technology. I don't know too many off the top of my head. There's Girls Who Code, Girl Start, STEM for Her. There are a lot of organizations like that. There's also a lot of YouTube channels that have experiments you can do at home, science tutorials, and so whether or not you want to get involved in an actual program, there are lots of virtual resources to where just at home you can support that interest and have fun learning about science and space together, which I think is a lot of fun. All right, how long was Peggy Whitson in space? What did she do there? So as I mentioned, Peggy holds a pretty serious record for time spent in space. In total, she has spent 665 days in space. She's broken a lot of space records. While in space, she did 6 spacewalks. She worked on science experiments. She helped to install adapter plates, make electrical connections, lots of space station maintenance. She did quite a bit in those 665 hours. All right. Are there any women scheduled to fly to the moon for Artemis? This is a great question. So I mentioned Artemis, and that's NASA's program that aims to return humans to land on the moon. And with that program, they aim for one of those first people, that first crewed mission to land on the moon, one of those people to be a woman. Now, there are roughly a dozen women at NASA who are eligible to be in that position and land on the moon. They do not know, they haven't announced who that's going to be yet. We don't know. And of course, that's not going to be the only lunar landing in the future with the success of Artemis. So who's to say how many of these women, who exactly will land? But it's really great to see this incredible pool of women who are so accomplished, all be eligible for this really incredible moment in history that I, for one, am looking forward to. All right, let's see. What are NASA, ESA, etc. doing to encourage more women in space programs and missions? This is a great question. It seems like they are trying to do more. ESA, which for those of you who don't know, is the European Space Agency, just put out a call for astronauts, and in that call for astronaut applications, they specify that they are very much encouraging women to apply. They also, totally as an aside, are looking to have their first ever physically disabled astronaut in their astronaut corps. NASA is also working to try to support women. I think that specifically Artemis is probably their biggest initiative to kind of put women at the forefront of these space missions. But there are so many women doing really incredible things at NASA right now. It's really, really amazing to see. Someone asks, did they ever redesign those spacesuits to fit women better? So I assume that this is in reference to the all-woman spacewalk, which was supposed to take place earlier than it did, but there weren't two spacesuits that would fit the two women on the space station. Now, there may have been some misunderstandings out there about what happened and how and why this took place. So there aren't male spacesuits and female spacesuits. Spacesuits just come in different sizes, and different pieces are different sizes. So for example, there might be a medium torso and a large torso, and then leg pieces, the helmet, other pieces that they can size and put together. And each astronaut, before going up, tests to see which sizes work best for them. So unfortunately, they didn't have the correct sizes on board. But I think that with the backlash of that getting out, NASA is very seriously considering making sure that they have the correct size spacesuits on board for who they think is going to do spacewalks, etc. Unfortunately, that was just kind of a bit of an oversight and an unfortunate accident. But, c'est la vie, right? Okay, someone asks, were there any other black women astronauts to go to space following Mae Jemison? Yes. So Mae Jemison, as I mentioned, is the first black woman to ever go to space. And unfortunately, there have not been that many after her. Stephanie Wilson and Joan Higginbotham, they are also two black women who have flown to space as NASA astronauts, but only two others. Now there is Yvonne Cagle, Jeanette Epps, and Jessica Watkins, who are also three black women who are astronauts at NASA. However, they have never flown. Mae Jemison is not the only one, but there is a very, very short list, which I hope changes in the very near future. All right, someone asks, is it true that women astronauts were made to wear makeup and Sally Ride refused? No. No, but there's an interesting story behind why I think you asked this question. So, back in the day, when Sally Ride was preparing for her first space flight, the first American woman to go to space, male engineers at NASA just assumed that women would want makeup in space. So they took it upon themselves, yes, they took it upon themselves to make a makeup kit that could fly to space, choosing the makeup themselves. You can look it up online. Their selections are kind of funny, and it's kind of a quirky looking little thing. However, the women weren't all interested. Now some women have chosen to, wear makeup in space, out of space, it doesn't matter, it's totally their choice. But it was very funny that they decided to make that choice for them, and then Sally Ride and the other women were kind of like, that's okay. Some of them were kind of interested, but most of them really weren't. And so it's just, one of those kind of funny stories from that era. All right, what did Vera Rubin contribute to science? Great question. So I mentioned Vera Rubin a little while ago, and she contributed an immense amount to space science. She confirmed the existence of dark matter. She explained the science behind stars. She uncovered a discrepancy between angular motion of galaxies and observed motion. I mean, the list of what she has contributed to science is astronomical. Sorry. So yeah, Vera Rubin is one of the many incredible women who has made really unbelievable contributions to science. All right, this is an interesting question. What challenges did women actually face in the early years of working for NASA? So I wasn't there, I didn't work there, I can't speak for all of them. I'm sure each woman who worked at NASA through those decades has a different story. But it has been well documented and well talked about that there were challenges. Both at NASA and in general at that time, abject discrimination was not unheard of. It was fairly commonplace for women to be discriminated against in general, and not just at NASA, but in general at that time, women were frequently not considered for hiring for certain positions. Obviously at NASA they weren't allowed to be astronauts, they weren't always given leadership opportunities, so there really was a pretty distinct glass ceiling. And then you just, throw in kind of more forefront discrimination, which of course I cannot personally speak to. I was not there, but I'm certain that not just at NASA, but in general at that time, women working in any kind of sciences or technical or male-dominated industry, those challenges I'm sure existed. And then you look at women of color and all the additional challenges and discrimination that they almost definitely experienced through those decades. So yeah, again, I can't speak to specific people's experiences, but that was just what it was. Okay, take a quick sip of water for this last one. All right, let's see. Is there a message you can give to people who are angry about NASA HQ being renamed after Mary W. Jackson? Those who say, why does it matter that she was a woman? They don't seem to understand. That's a really interesting question. So I very luckily haven't seen anyone being mad, though people get mad about everything. But I can't imagine how they could be. As you mentioned in your question, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, the discrimination and the challenges and the obstacles faced by women like Mary Jackson was really extreme, and how they overcame that, not to just overcome that in general, but the contributions that she made as a scientist, as an engineer at NASA. And then she went on through her career to specifically support and uplift other women in STEM and in sciences and in space. She didn't just contribute individually, but she helped to change the culture and to really promote hiring and supporting women specifically at NASA. And so I think that it's really great to see the agency really showing their appreciation for her and the work that they have and the work that she did to really change things at NASA and really make it a better place to be and really contribute her extremely great work to the agency. So I don't know, if people are going to be mad, that's on them, but I cannot imagine being mad about NASA thanking someone for helping them out and doing them a great service by improving life at NASA. All right, so unfortunately that was all the time we had for questions this week, but before I go, let's take a quick look at what was new in space this week. So of course, NASA's Perseverance rover is still making progress on the red planet, testing its legs. It took its first drive recently, and it continues to collect data, take photographs, and it's currently looking for the spot to test the Mars helicopter Ingenuity. So it's exciting just to see the data continually coming back and information coming back. It hasn't even been there a month, and what we've seen and learned so far has been pretty cool. All right, also recently, Russia and China have agreed to build a moon research station together. SpaceX launched another fleet of Starlink satellites, and a meteorite fell in the UK. The first known UK fireball, first UK meteorite known in about 30 years. A family actually found it in their driveway. Pieces of the meteorite, literally in their driveway, they saw the remains. And were very smart in calling their local museum. So that is all of the weird and crazy space and science for this week. This has been Space Chat. Join me again next Friday. And as always, stay tuned right here at space.com.